That CPD show. My name is Chris and I'll be your host today. And today I'm joined by Hannah Williamson. For nearly 2 decades, Hannah has served in the local church in various roles, including as youth pastor and then executive pastor. Hannah has a particular heart for seeing young leaders developed and equipped to live out their influence in both the world around them and the local church. Hannah lives in East London and is the Young Lions lead for Assemblies of God GB. Hannah, welcome to the show. Great to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Fantastic. And would be brilliant to hear a little bit about Young Lions. How's that going? I know you've been in the role about a year now. So tell me about what's going on in Young Lions.
Yeah, so really exciting. I think Young Lions now, we're probably going into the 22nd year that it's been running, which is just incredible. And so it feels a real honour to be building upon the legacy of that, really. But I think over the last year, we had over 400 people at the 3 events that we ran, and a whole heap of churches engaged with it. So we're really excited about sort of what things are looking like moving forward. We've been working on the team, getting more people involved, working on the content to make sure it's up to date. So yeah, been all round exciting.
Very good, excellent. Well, we're here to talk about your 3 favourite resources. But before we do that, it's obviously very important to talk about desert. This is Desert Island Development after all. It's not a desert island; it's a desert island, which I think is much better. So should we talk about your favourite dessert? What's your favourite one?
Yeah, so this is a bit random, so get yourself ready for it, but it is sticky rice and mango. So it's a Thai dessert. Have you ever had it, Chris?
I have never had sticky rice and mango. It's one of those things what I think about is it's going to be either some kind of rice pudding with like kind of the the kind of canned mango on top. And that's probably why I wouldn't go for it at a restaurant.
No.
But maybe I've missed this. Maybe I've missed the boat here.
Yeah, because I was never a fan of rice pudding, but sticky rice is a kind of unique consistency, really creamy, sweet, and then on the side you have mango. So if you go to a Thai restaurant, you'll definitely get it there. Or when I've traveled to Asia, I always have it because I love it so much. So it's definitely worth trying, I think.
Okay, so I need to get this, how it's different from tell me some of the things that are in it, because at the moment I'm still, how is it sweet? What brings the sweetness to this dessert?
I have taught myself how to make it. So, there's definitely a lot of sugar in it when you do rice, but it's a certain kind of pudding rice. And then it's just really, really creamy. But there's something about the creaminess mixed with the mango that makes it really special.
Okay, right. Okay, yeah. So it's got that kind of creaminess with the kind of fruitiness.
Yeah. Interestingly, when I was in Malaysia, I had it and the rice was green.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That might have slightly swung it against it for me.
But when you've tried it, I need to know, because
like
you might love it.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I'm all for trying new desserts, and sticky rice with mango definitely sounds like one I would definitely give a try next time that I see it on the menu. Not sure I'm really wanting the green one, but if it comes green, then I will endeavor to try it.
Okay, good. Glad to hear.
All right, brilliant. All right, well, that's the dessert, sticky rice and mango. Should we go to your first resource?
Yeah, so my first resource, which I feel like if anyone knows me, this will be no surprise that I'm saying this, but it's a book called Protégé, with the tagline, Developing Your Next Generation of Church Leaders, by a guy called Steve Saccone. And I love this book. I mean, I use it loads when I'm mentoring younger leaders. But for me, I love the way that it's written, because it's written so that a younger leader can obviously read it and learn, but it also gives like tips for the mentor to be able to help the younger leader. So I think like to have like those 2 things in one book is like amazing. So yeah, it's definitely something I think is worth every leader having on their bookshelf to be able to help develop a younger leader.
Brilliant. Okay, well, let's dive into that book and find out some of the kind of the pearls of wisdom that's in there. Tell me some of the things that you've learned from the book that have been really helpful in mentoring younger leaders.
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons I love it is because it's just really real. So it's split into 5 parts. And it talks about, firstly, the whole first section is about character, which, if you know anything about Young Lions, our first year of Young Lions is about character. And so I love the fact that it focuses in on that before anything else. And just the topics, even within the character section, are really interesting. So it talks about the sin of imitation, the sin of performance, the sin of overconfidence, and the sin of entitlement. So I always find that whenever I read it, even for myself, but also if I'm reading it alongside a younger leader, that they often read it and are a bit like, whoa, they are quite hefty topics to kind of dive into. But for me, it feels like they really kind of dig into things that I guess we don't always dig into as deeply, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's that. The second part is all about relationships, so commitment, conflict, attachment. And then the next parts are about communication, mission, and entrepreneurial leadership. So I feel like it gives kind of a real broad range of topics to be able to work through with a younger leader.
What have you found that's been the most impactful of those? I mean, there's all those three things would be impactful, but what have you found probably the most transformative for how you coach leaders?
I think I've loved the part on entrepreneurial leadership. So I just think it's not always spoken about in terms of like, how do we help younger leaders to think differently about how they're going to reach, you know, the next generation coming through, or how they're going to reach people with the gospel. And sometimes we, I guess, in our minds have a set idea of how that looks in church, but this book really challenges the thinking of that and helps younger leaders to think in different ways about how they're actually going to reach the world around them. So I think, yeah, some of that has been really interesting. But then coming back to the character side of things as well, I think, yeah, always transformative just to see a young leader maybe read something and then be like, oh, I've never really thought of that. I need to really work on that. And I think being able to see that actually outworked has been, yeah, really good.
I guess what we're seeing at the moment is it feels like the youth of the world is, it's constantly changing. It's a constantly changing thing. The youth are constantly changing. And the coming generation that's coming through seems different from the generation you and I grew up as part of. We're both millennials, and but this new sort of Gen Z leaders, how has the landscape changed, and how does that then influence how you mentor leaders?
Yeah, I mean, I always think like when I'm mentoring someone that I need to take a position of wanting to learn as well. And so I often try and think, if I'm going into coaching or mentoring a younger leader, this book's really helpful in terms of like setting some topics to talk around. But the reality is this book was written quite a few years ago, and so I'm still using it as a resource, whilst at the same time trying to learn from the people that I'm coaching or mentoring, because like you say, it definitely has changed loads, and there's loads of stuff that's different. In fact, I was talking to a friend the other day about just probably when we were both growing up, how different the influence of the phone was to what it is now. But I think when you're kind of coaching and helping a young leader to sort of work through some of that stuff, you're there as that encouragement, aren't you, as well as asking the right questions to help them think through to get to the right answers. And so I think it's to do with how do we come into this attitude of mentoring? Is it, we want to change them completely, or is it that there's a part of it where we're like, no, we actually want to grow through this process as well as the younger leader we're pouring into?
Yeah, very good. What would you say the impact of this book has been on you, or on your ministry? What would you say, if you were to sort of sum that up into a short sentence? Well, it doesn't have to be a short sentence. It can be a long sentence if you like.
I mean, it's obviously been really impactful because I'm still using it. And I think like when I was youth pastoring, often with my youth team, I'd sit down with a group of them and we'd work through some of the sort of topics in the book, which were really helpful. But I think I'm now a few years on from that, and in a different, in different environments, but it still seems to me to be as impactful. And I think even for me, as I read it alongside a young leader, obviously my mindset is like, how can I try and help them grow? But actually, every time I read some of these chapters, I'm so challenged myself. How can I ensure that I'm working on my character so that I'm not trying to be somebody else, but I'm actually being myself? Or how am I ensuring that I'm not leading in a way, it's just a performance thing, but I'm actually doing it right before God. So I think even just going over the book over and over again has kind of helped me to constantly be coming back to some of those things and challenging myself in them moving forward.
Yeah, I remember hearing, I think it was Kerry Newhoff, I think, saying that, to work twice as hard on your character as you do on your competency. And I think a lot of books focus on competency, and rightly so. Obviously they're really helpful, but to have something that's specifically for young leaders, starting off. But I think you're right. It's true for everyone that we all need to work on our character. I don't think anyone's here thinking, "Yep, character sorted." But for young leaders to work on character, and that's quite different from every other kind of leadership that you get outside of the church, because not many other places really focus on character. How have you found mentoring leaders and talking about character with them? How does that work out for you? Just looking at that, specifically at that character piece.
I think it's great because it makes the younger leader think differently. So like you say, if they're going to lead within the world or the marketplace, often it's more about the skill set. So I think the fact that it's really challenging character and getting a young leader to really think. So I often encourage them to think through some questions that maybe I've set off of the chapter before we meet. So by the time we meet, they've had a chance to kind of think this through and then work out how it outworks in their own sort of daily lives. So I think, it's seeing that happen. And I guess, like I said, those sort of light bulb moments where a young leader will read something and be like, oh, that really affected me, or that's something I really need to go and work on. I think just that realization or that self-awareness that comes through the prompts of what this is saying is really helpful for a young leader.
Fantastic. Well, that's Protégé by Steve Saccone. Is that right? Saccone?
Yeah. Well, I think so. Yeah.
So that's Steve Saccone. Should we go on to your second resource?
Yep. So second one is called Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership by Ruth Haley Barton. So I know from the podcasts I've already listened to, there's kind of been this common theme of developing your sort of self and ensuring you're not, I guess, overworking or ensuring you're taking a Sabbath, all of those kind of things. So it kind of goes along this similar line, but I'll read a quote that I've just written out from the book. It says, "When the early Wesleyan bands of Christ followers got together in small group meetings, their first question to each other was, 'How is it with your soul?'" And that sort of struck me, this idea of us always being really conscious of what's going on in the inside of us, which obviously has so much impact on how we operate as leaders.
Yeah, so let's dive into strengthening the soul of your leadership. How does Ruth Haley Barton talk about, how do you go about strengthening the soul? How do you do that?
So she basically works through the biblical narrative of Moses talking about our soul. So I love the fact that it took a whole, I guess, aspect of the Bible and then worked it through, helping us kind of understand what that looks like. And she really talks through things like solitude, self-reflection and self-awareness, calling, taking others on a spiritual journey, living within our limits, spiritual rhythms, those kind of things, just to kind of challenge, I guess, where we're at. And I guess similar to what I was saying with the previous resource, what it's done for me is I read it through when I took my sabbatical, and I found it really helpful just to kind of unpack what was going on within my soul. But then a few years later, I sort of picked it up again, partly because I was talking to somebody about it. And again, it sort of just struck me how powerful it was in terms of working through these things and being reminded that we have to come back to some of this stuff and sort of, implement it in our lives.
Yeah, you're right that it's been a running theme in this podcast, and we, you know, I don't tell people what to bring, but it's something that's clearly a vital topic. How has that looked like? You know, you talked about there's things like solitude and silence and those kind of things that are part of strengthening your soul. How's that look like for you? What's strengthening your soul look like for you practically?
Yeah, so I think this idea of solitude, having time alone with God, but how that like impacts us now in the world we live. I think it's really challenged me personally in that, but also like how do we set an example for those we're also leading to do that? I'm as we said, I'm from London, which is like always fast paced and people are so busy. And so there's this part in the book where it talks about the Sabbath, and it states how like our world doesn't help with this. Like we're not functioning in a way that allows us to operate like this, because everything's running so crazy. And so I think it's just really challenged me to really be conscious of how I make space to have time alone with God, away from my phone, switched off from everything else, and sort of understanding what I need for my soul as well, to be able to get better and sort of be closer to God. I mean, it says in one part, it says, but in addition to typical obstacles to creating such a day created by secular culture, i.e. the Sabbath, we made the sad discovery that the church itself was a major obstacle to creating a Sabbath rhythm. And I remember reading that and thinking, whoa, that is a challenge for us as church leaders. How do we help, like, I guess, foster an environment that allows for this thing called the Sabbath? And I'm not sure we always do it very well.
No, I often think that that's a thing that we need to think about working on, because, you know, people work, you know, say, you know, 5 days a week, and then it comes to the weekends, and it could be, you know, there's a, you know, something on a Saturday, you know, it could be a conference, or it could be some training or something like that, and then Sunday you could be getting, you know, people who are serving at church could be getting there from, you know, really early, 8 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, whatever, you know, and then they're all morning, and by the time it gets to Sunday afternoon, they're, you know, they just want to sit down with hopefully a roast dinner and relax, but that's still not really a Sabbath. You know, we've not helped people have Sabbath, so it's very difficult. And obviously churches are working in people's margins because of work, and so the challenge is that the push and pull of needing to move forward, but needing to look after the soul of the individual, the pastoralness of it. That's a difficult thing to judge. What are your thoughts on that, about maybe how churches could learn from starting to put a rhythm of Sabbath in? So, you know, every church has got lots to achieve and lots to do, and I don't think, you know, you and I probably wouldn't want to take away from that, but also there's some good things that we could think through that might help. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think firstly, I guess the obvious is, what are the leaders at the top? You know, I don't like saying that, but those that are the primary leaders, how are they outworking this firstly, so that they're modeling it to the people around them? And I think because part of my role at the moment, I work with lots of different churches, often you don't see leaders having healthy habits for this. So they just work all the time, don't take a day off. And so then when it comes to those that are being led by them, it's very hard for them to follow, or to even challenge maybe a younger leader to do that when the older leader is not doing that. So I think firstly, I think leaders really have to think through how can they do this. And then I think secondly, they have to then think, okay, for my immediate team around me, how do I foster an environment that encourages this? And I don't think any of these are simple, and maybe it looks different in different parts of the country, but I just think there has to be some conversation to help people think through how they're going to do this. Because I think what happens is those that are leading behind the primary leader feel like there's a lot of expectation, and I've got to live up to, you know, what's being set for me, or what they're expecting of me. And sometimes I think the main leaders need to maybe take a little bit more time to think, okay, how am I going to help my staff or my leadership team to think through this, because that's where it will obviously filter down into the local church as well. So I don't know whether there's any great answers to it, apart from maybe just encouraging some small steps forward that would help people, even if it's, like having an hour without your phone. maybe that's a first step, to try and help people do that.
Yeah, one of the things I've done is I've taken my emails off my phone.
Yes.
Because I've because it was so easy just to, the email comes in, the notification comes up, and it's so easy. And especially when you need those times that you just need to go, actually, I need to switch off, and I think they've started to bring in these kind of focus modes, so you don't get notifications these days. But even then you've still got the device in your hand, haven't you? So it's the having time away from the device, and I think it's something that you're right, it starts at the very basic level, at how we putting those rhythms in our own life, and then it goes to the more corporate, how we planning our events well, and those kind of things. Great. Is there anything else from that book, Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership, that you want to pick up on?
I'll just read the kind of one last quote, I guess, which just says, one of the most important rhythms for a person in ministry is to establish a constant back and forth motion between engagement and retreat. Times when we're engaged in the battle, giving our best energy to taking the next hill, and times when we step back in order to gain perspective, re-strategize, and tend our wounds, an inevitability of life in ministry. And I liked that quote because I just thought it was very real, in terms of like, we're not saying we're always going to have this perfect, or like, life's going to go a certain way and we can just plan for this perfect Sabbath all the time. It's actually saying, no, there are times when we have to engage in the battle before us. But often what happens is we keep going, and we don't take that time to retreat and actually heal from what we're facing or what we're going through. And I think that's something, I've been trying to learn to do better, is realize in those crazy busy times or full-on times that I then after that have to take time away to retreat and allow God to work on my soul.
Great. Okay, well, that is Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership by Ruth Haley Barton. Should we go on to your final resource? What's your final one?
So final resource, not a book this time, but I thought we could talk maybe about mentoring and coaching, because I think sometimes we go to the obvious, don't we, like a podcast or a book, but felt really challenged on sort of talking about this, because I think it's something for me that I've always tried to put into my life. And I think, my dad, who was the pastor of our church when I was growing up, he was so good at this. Like, he was so intentional about getting people to pour into his life. So it's kind of rubbed off on me and sort of been something that I think, no, this is something I definitely need to ensure that I'm doing.
Great. So talk to me about how that looks for you. What kind of mentors do you seek out? How does the process work?
So I just had a thought about like 3 different ways that I do this, because I think when we think of the word mentoring or coaching, maybe like one idea comes to mind. But I think for me, the first way is that I've tried to always have regular, ongoing mentoring and accountability. So it's not that the person necessarily stays the same for the rest of my life, but definitely for a season of my life, there are regular people, maybe 2 to 3 people who I meet with regularly. And I talk through, different things that are going on in my life. Sometimes those people, I talk about different aspects of my life because they can help me in different areas. I've been really intentional about not just having one person. I think that's important. That verse in, I think it's Proverbs 11:14, it says, where there is no counsel, the people fall, but in the multitude of counselors, there's safety. So I think, that's really, really important. And then secondly is, I've called it one-off seize the moment mentoring. So just being aware that often I'll be in spaces or rooms where there's leaders that are so much further on than me. And sometimes I can feel a little intimidated, but I'm trying to get better at sort of seizing the moment and using it as an opportunity to have a mentoring moment, even if they don't realize it. So I go in with some questions ready to ask them. And then finally is what I've called long gone mentors. So if you've ever read Wayne Cordero's book, The Divine Mentor, he speaks about this, particularly from men and women in the Bible who mentor us. But I think as well, there's so many people in history that we can grab, some knowledge from them and learn from them, and they can kind of mentor us through their writings.
Yeah, I really love that idea of the seize the moment mentoring. There's someone that you maybe you're meeting someone, or there's a visiting speaker or whatever it is, multiple options there, but just taking that moment just to to come with questions in your mind and to be able to ask those questions, because that you're not going to get that chance otherwise, and so seizing the opportunity even could be with social media, it can be something as simple as a Twitter reply or a question on there, because you can get so much. The ability to contact people these days is very good. I found a way of mentoring, which was the sneaky way of mentoring, which was by I ran a podcast, not this podcast, a different podcast, and you could just ask people questions, and you think, well, what would I ask this person if I wanted to learn from them? And I just recorded it, and so I'm not trying to advertise another podcast. So this listen to this podcast, but there's lots of different ways of doing it. Let's dive into some of those kind of that mentoring. How maybe a bit of the practicalities. How do you go about finding mentors? What do you look for? Maybe some of the practicalities.
So I think growing up, I was always looking for particularly a woman for me that was further on than me, that I could aspire to be like. That wasn't always the most simplest thing, but I think I've just worked really hard at it. So I'd always be on the lookout, who is it that I admire? And then one thing my dad taught me was just to always make the big ask. So I've just tried to be brave about that, and when I find somebody that I think, I'd really like to learn from them, I'm aware they may have busy schedules, they may not be able to give me a load of time, but I might as well ask, at least for a one-off session, and then see how it goes. And of course, you don't know if you're going to click with a person or if they can give you the time, but in that first session, I sort of try and make the most of it, and then see, okay, is this something that maybe could go on further? And then try to, particularly if it's someone new, there's some people that have, I guess, mentored me for years, but if it's someone new, I'm trying to see, could I ask maybe for just 6 sessions with them and sort of see how it goes, so that for the mentor, they're not feeling like, gosh, this is like a never-ending thing, but it gives a bit of a start and an end to it. And then I just try and be the one that sort of initiates the meeting up. I'm really conscious of people's diaries and stuff, and I think in the past I've kind of felt like, oh, if they don't get in contact with me, maybe they don't want to mentor me, but generally it's just the case that they're too busy, and I'm not top of their priority list, which is understandable. So I try and be the one that's like being really active in doing that. And then I think in terms of what I'm looking for someone that, like, maybe in an area that I want to grow in, is like further on than me, or someone inspirational in ministry that I can really learn from. And it changes at different seasons, obviously. So
yeah, that's great. And I've often found that when I've asked people just to meet up, even for an hour for a coffee or something like, or even a Zoom meeting, that very rarely people will say no. Because true. Actually, you think of it in your own life. If someone comes to you and says, "Can I grab an hour of your time to just, pick your brain a bit or something, and just to learn from you," you're inclined to say yes, because you want to help people.
It's an honor, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And so when you think about it that way, it's always important to make that big ask. And actually, people are more willing to say yes, because people do want to help, and they want to pass on their knowledge, and they want to pass on their wisdom they've gained. And so yeah, I would say I definitely would agree with that. Make the big ask, because if you don't ask, then I always remember being told, what's the worst that can happen is that they just say no. And then you've lost nothing, there's nothing
Yeah.
to lose by asking someone just to say, can I just take an hour just to learn from you and just ask you some questions? And I've certainly found that really beneficial in my life as well. Great. Well, there's 3 resources there. So we've got Protégé by Steve Saccone. We've got Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership by Ruth Haley Barton, and resource 3 is Mentoring. Of course, all of that would be wonderfully enjoyed by a sticky rice and mango, which obviously,
hopefully you'll be now having.
Well, I think this is going to be the case. I think I've got to embrace that rice for dessert is going to be is a good thing. But I think all of those things, reading a book whilst having some sticky rice and mango sounds rather good. So, brilliant. Hannah, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed finding out the resources that have really been beneficial to you. I'm sure we'll speak again soon, but lovely to see you.